Good evening, everyone. My name's John Frank, and I'm the Vice President for EU Government Affairs at Microsoft. And it's a pleasure to welcome you here to the Microsoft Center. And thanks for coming out. We're launching a new series today, which we're calling the Book Talk series. And we want to have, we want to become a regular stop for authors that publish books. But to start, we were really pretty selective about, well, there's lots of books out there, but we want to find one that sort of relates to Microsoft and relates to issues we care about. And so with Keith Stuart, we've got a book that's really great, and it talks about, sort of experiences with technology. And so we thought that was really great. And Keith is a veteran journalist and author, currently The Guardian, leading newspaper in London on games and video sector, which is actually a very large piece of the entertainment economy. And so we're very fortunate to have you here with us. We appreciate it and look forward to your talk.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Okay. Yeah. So all for coming this evening, and thank you for having me in Brussels. This is my first time here, so it's very exciting. I'm not sure who is in the audience and what you know about video games and what you know about technology. So I'm going to cover lots of different stuff about technology and video games and culture. As well as talking to you a bit about my book. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about how I wrote the book as well and how it came about and my approach to bringing video games into a novel. So who am I and what am I doing here? This isn't a philosophical question. I just thought I'd maybe introduce myself just before I started. I don't usually do these things sitting down. It's quite comfortable. I like it. So I've been a video game journalist for 20 years. I started on the video game magazine Edge in October 1995. I've always played video games, and I went and did a course at university, actually, in English and drama. And to my absolute horror, when I graduated, I realized that English and drama wasn't really a kind of vocational degree, and didn't move me immediately into a specific job. So I didn't know what to do with myself, but I knew I loved video games, so I went to work in video games journalism, so I worked on lots of magazines about video games. And then 10 years ago, I was asked by The Guardian to help them write a blog about video games and video game culture. So I'd already written a little bit for them about games, but so I started blogging for them every day about games, and eventually, with my foot in the door, I managed to force the door open, and now I work there full time as a video game editor. And I think The Guardian is maybe the only quality newspaper in the world with a full-time video game editor, which I find staggering, because every single newspaper will have a music editor, they'll have a film editor, they'll even often have a theatre editor, but somehow they don't have video game editors, which I think is an enormous oversight. So that's the role I do there. Thank you, The Guardian. But what I'm here to do is talk about my book in some ways, which came out of my career. And that is A Boy Made of Blocks. It's a novel which I wrote throughout 2015. And it's about a father called Alex, who has an autistic son called Sam, who's 8 years old. There has been trauma in the family. It's very difficult to deal with autism sometimes in a family home. So Alex and his wife Jodie have argued. There's been lots of tension. He's moved out of the family home, and he has to try and find a way to start communicating with his son again. And this is what my book is about. As you can see, I've been really, really lucky with the book. I think the themes of autism and Minecraft and video games and families struck a chord with publishers around the world, to my enormous surprise. And the book is going to be released, or has been released now, in 12 different countries, and there's 12 more to publish over the course of this year. So the book is going to be in 25 languages, which is incredible. And I've just put images up of some of the languages that the book is available in, and it's really interesting to see how how different countries have interpreted the themes of the novel in their imagery. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about, okay, so how did I come to write a book about video games and families? And because to some people this kind of seems strange, because a lot of people think of video games as being something for teenagers and not something really that plays an enormous part in the family, or at least not a kind of productive part in the family. But I want to tell you that I came from an era in the early 80s when I started playing video games, where video games were very much thought of as something for the whole family. There was a lot of excitement about video games, a lot of excitement about personal computers, computers like the BBC, the ZX Spectrum, the Commodore 64, suddenly came out in the early 80s, and they made computers accessible and affordable to families around the world. It was a really, really exciting time, and video games were a part of that. So when I grew up, video games were very much something to be excited about, and I put up an image of lots of early adverts about video games, magazine adverts from the early 80s, and you can see how incredibly excited these families were gathered around these screens watching these videos. In fact, this is my favorite person here. I mean, just look at the raw excitement on her face, because here is playing video games in the home. It's incredible, and it's for everybody. But then for some reason in the 90s, the marketing around video games and the thoughts around video games changed, and people suddenly started to see them as something only for teenage boys. And there was this whole kind of stereotype that developed, that video games were kind of this sort of unhealthy obsession among boys, and and it was only teenage boys that played. And then through this, because the media, especially the right-wing media, and especially the tabloid media in the UK, when they find something that teenage boys like, they like to worry about it a lot. They like to see it as destructive. So we got all of these incredible headlines throughout the 90s about games somehow creating a new generation of sociopaths, which didn't happen in the end, strangely enough. So. Yeah, so the video games were thought of as something for teenage boys and something dangerous. But since then, over the last 10 years, there's been a renaissance in video games and the way we think about video games. I've just got some statistics here and some graphs, because obviously it's a PowerPoint presentation, therefore I have to provide graphs. So video games are really, really popular now. The industry makes around, this is some research by a market research company called Newzoo, that estimates that the video games industry, the global video games industry, is worth about $100 billion now, spread throughout the world. So that's a lot of money. That's more money than all movie box office plus all of the music industry put together. So it's big business. Also, it's not just for teenage boys anymore. So the average age of a video gamer now in this generation is 35. And the gender split with video games is roughly 50-50. Some of the surveys and charts that I've seen more recently have put women on 51 and men on 49, which is really, really interesting. And again, really challenges lots of the stereotypes that we have that video games are just for boys. So we're living in a generation now where video games are seen as quite pervasive in culture. Even if you don't really play them yourselves, you'll know about them. And something really interesting has happened since the dawn of broadband internet. Now it's possible for people to create and make games in very, very small teams and distribute them globally via the World Wide Web, via the internet. That you can upload your video games that you've made, and people all the way around the world can download them via broadband. So that it takes out of the equation the whole incredibly expensive process of creating discs to sell games on, and then manufacturing them and distributing them around the world. Video games can now be made by small teams with very, very small budgets, with very, very cheap tools, and distributed online to an audience of millions. So we're starting to see a kind of a dawn of independent gaming. So if you think about the movie industry, you get your blockbuster Hollywood movies that take up all your multiplex time over the summer, but you also have an incredible, rich global art house scene, lots of small independent movies which get made and distributed. Well, the same thing happens with video games. So we have the big cultural, the big blockbusters like Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, games we all kind of know, But because of digital distribution and the broadband internet and the fact that people can download and upload games really quickly, we now have this really healthy independent game sector. So we have games like, for example, Journey here, which is a really, really beautiful artistic video game, a meditation on life, where you're in a desert, walking towards a mountain, overcoming obstacles to get there, and it's really kind of a metaphor. It's like a life journey. And it's beautiful, and it has a wonderful orchestral soundtrack by a composer called Austin Wintory, who's a wonderful American composer. It's a beautiful game. We also have games like Firewatch, which is about a man who is grieving for his lost wife, whose wife dies, and he goes and takes a job in the Wyoming wilderness in America to try and get away from his life. And you take control of him in this adventure story as he tries to come to terms with the loss of his wife and his place in the world. This isn't Call of Duty. No one gets shot in this game. It's a game about personal identity and discovery and grief and the wonder of the natural environment. So this is the environment that I'm writing about now in The Guardian. Video games are now having a massive influence on other areas of culture and society. And they're dealing with really interesting, deep political and social themes. So, for example, Paper Please, a game by Lucas Pope that was released 2 years ago, is a game in which you play an immigration officer in a fictitious Eastern European city, and you're deciding who is allowed into who is allowed in through the immigration gates based on a daily changing list of requirements. And you're only allowed to let a certain amount of people in. But you have to earn money by letting people in and use that money to feed your own family. So it's all about the ethics of immigration and the kind of banality of evil, how it's very easy to become evil when you need to feed your family. It's a very interesting, complex social political game. We've also seen games like 1979 The Revolution, which is by an Iranian game developer about the 1975 Islamic Revolution in 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran, and you play a photojournalist exploring a city as the revolution takes place. The last game on here is 6x9, a virtual reality game actually produced by my own paper, The Guardian, about solitary confinement in US prisons. And it's a game where you put on a virtual reality headset and you find yourself in a 6x9 solitary confinement cell, and it's completely accurately modelled on what prisoners will discover in US jails. And you hear the stories of people that have been in these cells 24 hours a day, often for many years. So video games are now exploring culture, exploring politics in really interesting ways. And because the tools to make games are cheap, and because games are so prevalent, and because it's easy to get them online and find an audience, we're seeing now a new generation of very young game developers who maybe in the 70s might have picked up a guitar, learned 3 chords and formed a punk band. Now they might well pick up a cheap video game development package, get together with a few mates and make a video game. Like, video games have become a form of self-expression, and often angry self-expression. So it's a really, really interesting, profound era to be thinking about video games. And this is all kind of important background to my book. Video games are having an influence on other areas of culture and the arts as well. So there's a new genre of immersive theatre developing, where actors and audience members kind of dwell together in a space, and the story, the theatre, emerges through the interactions between the actors and the audience. It's almost like walking into a play. You can walk around and watch the action happening. And one of the main purveyors of this new form of theatre, Punch Drunk Productions, draw so many of their ideas from video games. They're big video game players. They love theatre, but they love the kind of expressive, interactive nature of video games, and they brought that in. So, immersive theatre is this kind of emerging art form which is using the dynamics of games in really interesting ways. Cinema is drawing heavily from video game lore and culture now. So the director of the latest Star Wars and Star Trek films, J.J. Abrams, grew up playing video games, and lots of the conventions that you see in his Star Wars movies are drawn from his years playing games. Things like large casts of characters interacting, big universes, lots of puzzles, interesting structure based around kind of linear progression through environments. They get lots of ideas from games. And also we're seeing art galleries drawing ideas from video games as well. So the last image here, you can see on the far right, the Tate Modern Gallery in London last year commissioned a bunch of Minecraft modelers to recreate famous 20th century artworks in Minecraft. So this is a picture of the Pool of London by Duran, re-rendered inside Minecraft. And the Tate commission this, and you can download it, and you can explore an artwork by Duran as a Minecraft world. So video games have kind of been accepted now as a form of communication, and in a weird, interesting way, television programs have now started to comment on video game culture. So I don't know if any of you have seen the brilliant TV series Westworld, which is about a kind of theme park made up of robots who are dressed as Western, Wild West cowboys and people who kind of work in saloons and brothels, and people who want to have a cowboy experience can go to this world and pretend to be cowboys, except it all starts to fall apart and the robots become sentient. The makers of Westworld, and it's one of the big shows of last year, were massively influenced by video games. In fact, Westworld is itself a metaphor for video games and virtual worlds. So what I'm trying to say is that video games have massively surpassed the kind of 80s and 90s cliche of boys in bedrooms playing alone. They now have a role to play in society. And we process lots of our lives now through screens. That's just the way we live. We've got smartphones, we've got tablets. This is the way we work. This is the way we understand the universe around us. And like I have to admit, I'm completely comfortable with that. Like in my family, screens are a big part of our lives. Here we are. So this is me with my sons, and every time I get to the end of a useful lifespan for me of one of my laptops, I pass it down. So this is in the middle is my son Zach, and at the end is my son Albie. Unfortunately, he's the youngest, so he gets the oldest hardware. But there we go, never mind. But this is kind of okay. Because video games, because we all understand video games, or lots of people in the millennial and the Generation Z understand the video games as part of their daily lives. Video games are being filtered into education now. So I have this statistic from 2015, it's slightly out of date, that there's 1.3 million desktop computers now in schools throughout the UK, and around about 1 million tablets in schools around the UK. So computer technology is being used in education in a really kind of prevalent way, and really interesting ways as well. So I was contacted recently by a school in Walsall in the Midlands in England, where they had a gaming week, and all of their lessons, everything that they taught for that week in this class, were taught through video games. So, for example, there's this beautiful video game called Tearaway, which is set in a kind of papercraft world where everything's made out of origami. The children played this, and then they created their own kind of origami and collages based around their experiences within the world. They played Journey, and they used that they played Journey, and then they wrote poetry and short stories about this world and this universe. They used it as a jumping off point. They played the game No Man's Sky, which is like a fantastic outer space exploration game where you can discover planets and fauna and flora, weird new monsters. And the children played this, and they wrote diary entries of every world they went to, and they discussed and described the plants they found and the creatures they found. And so you ended up with these really interesting, bizarre diaries that children have written about space exploration, about planets they found. Like, you could not do this unless we had video games. But one video game in particular has been really, really useful in the education space, and that's Minecraft. So I discovered Minecraft more or less almost as soon as it had come out on PC, and it came out in beta in about 2011. And for any of you that haven't played Minecraft, and there were lots of videos as you were walking in on the screens, It's effectively kind of a digital version of Lego. So you enter into this blocky world and you can explore it, you can gather materials, and you can build whatever you want out of the blocks that are there for you. You can mine for materials, you can create castles, mansions. My son has recently created a scale model of our local McDonald's restaurant, which I'm really proud about. So there's so much you can do in the world. You know, Minecraft it's creative, it's social, it's adaptable, but the most important thing about it is it's not just a video game. It's a space. It's a place to be creative. It's a toy. It's a social engagement place. It's all lots of different things all wrapped into one thing. And so Minecraft has been used very, very extensively in education over the last 2 or 3 years in schools around the world. Around 7,000 schools around the world now use Minecraft as to teach lots of things. Electronics, geography, geology, sustainable living, sustainable agriculture. And it's being used by teachers who have kind of played the game over the last 5 years and have realized that one of the great ways to teach children is obviously use the languages that they understand and the things they do all the time anyway. And if they're playing Minecraft, it's a great place to work on ideas together. And so last year, Microsoft released its Minecraft in Education pack, which is a special version of Minecraft where teachers can set up Minecraft servers in their schools so that children can create things together while the teacher observes and make sure no one can set fire to anyone else's house. Which is very important with children because they will do it if they can. For me, one of the most important things about Minecraft is the fact that it has seemed to have become something very, very popular with children on the autism spectrum and adults on the autism spectrum. And there's lots of reasons why this is. So Minecraft is a creative space. There are no rules or there are no directed rules. There are no missions. You're not being told to do anything. There's no one shouting at you to follow them. There's no mission orders. There's no objectives. The world is quiet and peaceful, and it reacts to you as a human being. It has beautiful, slow piano music. It's very sedate. It's very relaxed. Everything in the world has a logical system and an order. Whenever you put two things together in Minecraft on a crafting table, they will always produce the same thing. People on the autism spectrum often need and seek calm environments. They seek logic and they seek predictable outcomes to the things that they do. And Minecraft produces all of those. It's also social, so you can meet friends in the Minecraft world. But it doesn't rely on lots of the complicated social cues that lots of us take for granted that are very confusing and disorientating to people on the autism spectrum. So you can meet your friends in Minecraft, but you don't have to learn how to understand body language. You don't have to make eye contact with people. You can just get together with your friends in a world which is very simple and very understandable and build things together. And so lots of these factors have meant that Minecraft has been really, really valuable for people on the autism spectrum. Here's just a couple of quotes from people who have worked with Minecraft and have worked with children. I really like these. I can't see it here, but yeah, so I really like Victoria Todd, the psychologist from Autism Spectrum Australia, who says, Minecraft provides information in a visual format and structure and a certain amount of predictability. And I think it's all these things together. It's like the ability to be creative, but in a universe that is predictable. Like our world is very unpredictable. There's certain things we know will happen, but there's lots of things we don't. It's incredibly chaotic, especially for people on the autism spectrum. It's not just Minecraft, by the way, that's really super valuable to people on the autism spectrum. Pokemon Go, which was released last year, has been another game which has been extraordinarily helpful for people on the autism spectrum, because I don't know if any of you have played, but it's a smartphone version of Pokemon, which ties in with the GPS functionality of your phone. And you can basically wander around your town finding these little cute monsters and collecting them. And it tells you about your town as you're wandering around. It gives you little facts because it uses GPS data from Niantic Labs, the developers. They've cached lots of data about the world and they've put it into this game. So this is a game which gets you to explore your local environment, meet people, swap monsters, chat, talk, fight, and just make communication. But for children on the autism spectrum, these are all really difficult things. What Pokemon Go helps them with is it gives them something to look at while they're meeting other people. They don't have to make eye contact, and it also gives a purpose to social communication. So when my son plays Pokemon Go, he can meet other people on the street while we're wandering around in Frome in Somerset where we live, and he can talk to them about the Pokemon they have and the ones he has, and it just gives you a format for communication, and that's really important because my son couldn't walk up to a strange child on the street and make conversation with them. He'd find that terrifying. But because he has this thing on his phone, he can do it. Here's some examples of how Pokemon Go has helped people. I just wanted to make this point that there's more and more video games now that are using formats that help people who are not neurotypical to meet, communicate, and be creative. But really, my story is about Minecraft, and I wanted to show you a very quick video. In 2014, I was asked to take part in a documentary about video games and how video games had changed the world. And it was made by a comedian and broadcaster called Charlie Brooker, who himself used to be a video game journalist. And he chose 20 video games that he thought expressed the way that games could have helped change society. One of the games was Minecraft. And they brought me into a studio in North London one day. I was a tiny bit hungover. And they asked me to talk about Minecraft. And I think it was the first time I thought about Minecraft in the way that I discuss it in this video, which is a very short clip from the documentary. And it's weird. I think you can almost see the realization on my face of what I'm saying. And I think maybe the emotion comes through. This is my son Zach, and when he was 7, he was diagnosed on the autism spectrum, but we knew he was autistic before that. It takes a long time to get someone diagnosed. Zach had very limited vocabulary. He knew about 10 words at the age of 3, very few more at the age of 4. Found social situations very difficult. He found school almost impossible. He was really scared of the world. He found it very difficult to be creative, to express himself. And then we started playing Minecraft together when the Xbox 360 version came out. I'd always played a few video games with him, and he'd always really enjoyed them. But when Minecraft came out, I just had this idea that he would respond to it. And so I sat down with him, and we put it on. And honestly, it was just like it was like a light switch going on. It was like a whole new area of his brain awakening. And he got it. He got the game immediately. He knew what he had to do. He knew what he could do in the game. So he went from a child that couldn't paint, wouldn't draw, didn't see the point of those things, to suddenly being creative in this world, making houses, making farms, just making weird stuff. He'd always make houses, and then there's farm animals roam around the world in Minecraft, and he'd managed to get all the dogs that roam around the world into his house, and he'd put them in one room, which is always kind of terrifying, because you'd be walking around the room with him, and he'd open the door, and it'd be full of wolves. But this was the important thing. This was the first time in our lives when he started playing Minecraft. Oh, where's that gone? Hang on, that's not good. Yay, we're back! Lots of people saw the story. Including a publisher, Little Brown, which is one of the biggest publishing companies in the world. I didn't know this at the time. I'd never heard of Little Brown. And so Ed Wood, the editorial director from Little Brown, got in contact with me. He emailed me, and I completely ignored him. And he emailed me again, and I ignored that. And then a month later, he emailed again and said, look, I'd really like to discuss with you the possibility of maybe writing a novel about Minecraft, autism, and parenthood. And I just thought they were this kind of vanity publishing company because I'd not heard of them, and I just thought it's just kind of a rip-off thing. So I googled Little Brown, and the first thing I saw was that they just signed J.K. Rowling. So I thought, oh no, maybe there's something in this. So I went to meet them. I went to meet Ed. Ed Wood, the editorial director at Little Brown, who was really interested in my story. He has an autistic son as well, and it really moved him. And he said to me, look, I know you don't want to write a memoir, because I really didn't. So why don't you write a story about a father who has to connect with an autistic son through Minecraft? So kind of transplant your experience into a different family. And that's what we did. So I wanted to write a novel about a relationship which is forged through a video game. And I wondered how to do that, because the way video games are usually perceived in culture, when you usually see a film about where video games are featured, or see video games in a soap opera or a program, they're usually shown in one of two ways. Either video games in a soap opera or in a drama are the thing that the teenage child is doing when the parents want their attention. And it's always like, you see those scenes in dramas all the time where, where's our 14-year-old son? Oh, he's playing on his Nintendo. Oh, video games. That's how video games are usually shown in dramas. Or it's the thing that the 20-something stoner dude does when he's not dating the cool girl that he's supposed to be dating in the movie. These are the two aspects that video games cover. Video games are much more richly represented in science fiction, but often they portray like future dystopian worlds where a whole of society works in the form of almost like video games. So things like Ready Player One, The Player of Games by Ian Banks. These are great books, but they all are science fiction. They all teach video games as something kind of dark and dystopian. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to treat video games as something that's part of our everyday lives and aren't something that the teenager does when he's being annoying and aren't just for the stoner dude. So I thought about, how can I write a book where video games fit into normal life? And one of the ways I did it was that I tried to start thinking about everyday environments, and I tried to write about everyday environments almost like video game worlds, as places that were beautiful but also had peril in them. So I used things that I'd done with my son, like going to London, going to cafes, going to Bristol, which is near where we lived. And I thought about those cities and those places in almost as though they were video game environments, which is kind of how my son sees them. When my son walks into a cafe, it's a challenging environment. He's got to learn how it works. He's got to worry about how all the systems of the cafe work. Where do you queue? Where do you sit down? What do I eat? So I used those experiences, but I also used some of the negative experiences that my son had had. There's some places that my son finds really difficult. Playgrounds are really difficult. They're really confusing and noisy and scary, and none of the games make sense. School is a really massive challenge for my son because there's big classrooms, there's lots of noise. Playground games are really seamless and often change very quickly. So 1 minute the children are all playing football together, and then it becomes basketball, and then it becomes hide and seek, and my son can't keep up. So I wanted to put those into my books as well. And again, I thought about school almost like a video game environment. Children's parties, I mean, those are a nightmare for all of us, right? But for an autistic child, they're even worse because, again, there's all these crazy games and there's lots of sweets and chocolate and chaos and music and noise and rules. So I put all of these into the book, and all of them I processed almost through the lens of video games, thinking about them as challenges. So I needed to find a way to make people who don't play video games care about video games. So I've used video games as kind of a structure for my book, but I needed to present Minecraft as something in a way that people could understand, who could care about video games. If you don't play video games, how can I make you care that Minecraft is a place where Alex the father, Sam the son come together and learn about each other? How can I make you care about that? And the way that I did it really was I thought about Minecraft as a magical place. Like I presented Minecraft in my book as a creative, magical space. And I thought of it like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Narnia. I thought about it like the Emerald City in Wizard of Oz. I thought about it like the 100-Acre Wood in Winnie the Pooh. I thought about it not as a father and a son communicating through a video game, but I thought about it as a father and a son communicating through a space, a safe space, a creative shared world. And throughout my book, Alex and Sam use Minecraft as a safe social environment, a magical space where they're free to be themselves and be creative and are free from the things that scare him and also scare Sam, but also scare the father. I've got to race through because I'm really late. I think what I want to do really is represent something that I think is happening in video games, and it's that video games are becoming something creative. Video games aren't just about sitting back and shooting stuff anymore. What my son's experience of video games is that they're a creative thing. So you get games like Little Big Planet, Super Mario Maker, The Sims, Dragon Quest Builders, where you're making the world with the designers. And I think this is the future of video games. We're heading into an era where players are also co-authors of the experience. They're creative and they're beautiful. I think video games now are learning to appreciate us as human beings. There was a great game released last year called Event Zero, in which you have to convince an artificially intelligent computer aboard a space station to let you go home. And you're effectively communicating with the computer in the game, trying to make it understand how important it is for you to get home and see your family. And the computer itself uses incredibly advanced AI techniques. So it's really like doing a Turing test within a video game. And I think these elements are coming together. I have a very long quote here from Julian Tegelius, the associate professor and AI researcher at NYU. He's talking about the future of the video games. And I have this idea that video games are going to become much more personal in the future. And Julian agrees with me. And he sees a future where video game algorithms will actually be enthusiastic and interested in the gamer. Video games will learn from the gamer. Video games will change and adapt depending on how you play them. Julian is now working on an AI system with a company called Spirit, where they're creating AI characters that respond emotionally to the gamer and what they do. This is the future of video games. Like, it's not going to be about you hunting baddies and shooting people. It may well be about you talking to non-player characters and convincing them, being a diplomat, being a politician. That's one possible future. Video games are going to want to learn about us. They're going to become curious about us. This is the way computer technology is going. We're heading towards an era where computer-human interactions are going to be emotional and wise rather than just tapping a keyboard. So as far as I'm concerned, the future of video games is going to take on board procedural generation, which is the idea that a video game can make worlds on the fly, like Minecraft. Minecraft worlds are always created by the computer. Every time you play, it's a different world. This is going to align with lots of artificial intelligence mediums like machine learning, natural language processing. All of these things are going to come into video games, and they're going to create a new era of kind of emergent experiences. And I've certainly experienced this in a little way through Minecraft. I've seen something emerge from that game, which is more than the sum of its parts. I've seen emerging from that game my son as a creative being, which has been incredible. But I think really the main thing that I wanted to say in my book, and I guess the main thing I want to say now, just to use a G.K. Chesterton quote, I can't say it, the true object of all human life is play. And this is why video games are so important, and why all games are so important, and why I kind of evangelized them, and why I made them the center point of this novel. It's like the one thing I learned when I tried to communicate with my son and failed so many times was that what I wanted to do and what I needed to do was play with him and understand the world that he felt so safe to play. And that's the most important thing. Like, whatever I do as a parent, I have to be in a position where I can play with him in a world that he understands. So I guess the last message I want to leave you with this evening, and I know I've overrun, is always play. Like, here I am with my son when he was 2 years old, playing on an old PC laptop. The first games we ever played together, really simple games. And the second picture is me and my son about a month ago playing Minecraft together. And we're going to probably do that forever, I hope. That's it. Bye-bye. Thank you.
I don't play games. I don't play, video games. But I was just intrigued on what you said recently about the new games and artificial intelligence and adapting to the player and making you think more and be diplomatic. I'm just thinking how that seems like a bad thing for your child. How does that world? I mean, if they don't function in the real world, and then the video games which are helping them now kind of become this weird psychological thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the point that Julian Tegelius, who's an amazing researcher into AI, makes is that the video game learns from what the player does. So he's created a version, for example, him and his students, when he was at the University of Copenhagen, created a version of the game Super Mario Brothers, which is a platform jumping and collecting things game. But they made a version of it which learned the things that you like to do in the game. Like, if you really love jumping, it would create new levels for you and then put these into the game. So you'd end up playing games, a version of the game which was made just for you. So following that along, if my son, let's say my son plays a game in 3 or 4 years which has very advanced artificial intelligence and emergent narratives, it would learn the things that my son is capable of and the things that my son likes. And it would produce a version of the game for him which might be wildly different from someone else. So it might be that if it's a game about communicating with human beings, it will learn the way that he communicates and will create tasks which align with that. So he's not going to have to understand body language and psychology. The version of the game that it will make for him will be something which he's capable of achieving. So, I'm talking like 5-10 years down the road here, but the technology is there for this to happen. And also, we're seeing now very early experimental games in research universities like Georgia Tech that actually, this is going to sound quite sinister, but it's fine, or it might be sinister, that can actually use your Facebook profiles and your Twitter profiles. So there's experimental video games now which can go out of the game, go into your Facebook, and will actually be able to extract information from Facebook and Twitter and put this into the game world. So I think we're heading into a situation in 4 or 5 years' time where, for example, you might go into Grand Theft Auto 9 and walk into a room and the posters on the wall might be photos from your Facebook page. I really believe that that's going to happen. So yeah, I think it's going to be hyper-personalized. So video games will create worlds that fit the individual player. So I think my son will be okay. Any other questions? Yes, there's one here.
Thanks. I'm just thinking now that with virtual realities and augmented realities, Internet of Things, for example, can you foresee then that there'll be scenarios where, for example, with your child, he puts on some special glasses and it'll help him to interact in social kind of simulated environments?
Yeah.
That will then kind of help him then to, operate in the real world. It won't seem so strange and because he'll be able to test that out in a simulator. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, we're already seeing there's already a virtual reality social space called AltSpace VR. There's lots like it, which very much which simplifies social interactions. So you're put into a world with other people in your VR headset, and other people are represented as very simple robots on the screen with no like facial expressions and things like that. And you can hear people talking, but there's no expressions. And I think in some ways that would be an amazing tool for learning social situations for people on the autism spectrum. So yeah, I can definitely see the benefits there. One of the weirder things about augmented reality is that I think maybe in sort of 10 or 20 years time, we're going to see the end of what's known as consensual or consensualized reality. So the fact that we can all look around this room now and we all assume that there's kind of colored squares on that wall and there's some photos on that wall and there's a big picture behind me. If we're all wearing augmented reality headsets, I think we're going to end up customizing reality. I think we'll all end up with our custom versions of it. So as augmented reality software becomes more complex and understands what different objects are, I think we're going to see worlds which in which you can create the version of the world you want. Like if you want to live in Game of Thrones, and this is going to look like a hut somewhere, or if you want to live on the Starship Enterprise, it's all going to be sleek grey. I really do believe that that's something that can happen. But yeah, I think like for autistic people, yes, I think virtual reality could be an amazing training ground for social interactions, as Minecraft has been, just many more times more pervasive, I guess. Any more? Yes, question at the front here.
I have a short comment and question. The comment is I can resonate with you with the experience father-son. I think one of my first memories with video games is me and my dad trying to figure out how to have Warcraft 2 work on MS-DOS.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
actually have the cheats work on Warcraft 2, so that was fun.
Yeah.
My question is, being this a city of politics, I feel obliged to ask something about how we're going to decide things in the future. And I was intrigued by your graph, and I see that the next generation of decision makers, leaders, or whatever they are going to be video gamers.
Yeah.
How do you think that's going to impact the way that they interact with the world? Because they've been challenged since they've been kids with, let's say, out-of-the-box thinking.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a massive challenge. That we face a massive socio-political challenge in engaging with young people. I saw a talk last year by Nickelodeon, the big children's television channel, and they refer to 5 to 15-year-olds as Generation Swipe. This is a generation that expects to be able to interact with screens and expects to have every decision they made instantly acted upon by technology or their surroundings. So if you think about the way voting works, obviously because of security and because of the fact you have to make sure that voter fraud doesn't happen, it's incredibly anachronistic and atavistic to people who are used to things happening instantly. So the model of voting I think has to radically change, and the model of becoming involved as a person in a society and a culture that deals with politics and government and local government has got to radically change so that it can emulate the digital models that our children are used to using. Because the idea that you're on an electoral roll and you get a card through your door that tells you you've got to go and vote in 2 weeks in a scout hut somewhere 2 miles away, that's just ridiculous. To anyone under the age of 15, this is that alien to them. So yeah, there's a massive impetus on political systems to change, to emulate the digital super high speed instant reaction of the worlds that they're used to. I'm afraid I don't have any answers for that, but I do think what's really interesting is that children are learning much more about complex systems now through understanding how the App Store works or how Google works. They understand now that corporations are accountable. You only have to see what's happened earlier this week with United Airlines to see how accountable corporations are through social systems. Now, our teenage children are masters of that. They're masters of organizing and arranging responses online. So I think so much more of our governing and the responses of the government are going to have to take into consideration the ways that children and young adults use social systems. Because we're going to see a lot more United Airlines situations. We're going to see a lot more people like Sean Spicer aren't going to be able to exist, in 5 to 10 years' time, because you can just about get away with howlers like that now. But honestly, that stuff never goes away, and 15-year-olds never forget. So yeah, I think we need to radically rethink how political systems work, and along the lines of how we communicate and how society works in the digital world, and the infrastructures that we now accept on a daily basis. But I don't have any answers, sorry. Any more questions?
Thank you for your talk. I could very much recognize myself in it, I guess. And I was wondering, because you've had long experience with games, I've tried playing games with, let's say, my dad, and that usually doesn't take very long because there's such a skill difference between us that it gets boring very quickly. So I was wondering, do you have tips? Did you have experience with such a situation, and how can I make my dad enjoy playing the game?
Well, I think successful play is always about finding a place that's comfortable for everybody. So you have to think about what it is your dad plays and what it is your dad does. So if your dad's really into crosswords, then it's going to have to be word games that you play together. So like Scribblenauts or things like that, or Words with Friends, using a really old example. Not all games are like Twitch-based games, so like intellectual games would probably work very well. But it's all about like asking your dad, okay, what are the kind of board games you used to play, and then transferring that into the video game world, or give up on competition altogether and play cooperatively. So any of the Lego games are really, really good fun to play cooperatively with anyone. I've played them with grandparents, and you can chop up jobs within those worlds and share them together. Overcooked is a really great game to play with older relatives who might not understand like the intricacies of video games, but certainly understand. Overcooked, by the way, is a multiplayer cooperative cooking game. You're all chefs in a very busy restaurant, and you have to work together to cook stuff, chop up stuff, cook it, get it out into the restaurant. But it's really, really good fun. I've played that with older relatives, and they found it really interesting because they kind of understand the concepts, right? Everyone understands that, you know, to run a restaurant, you have to be super fast and cook things, then get them out. So, so I think it's like thinking about what your dad understands in his world and bring it in and finding the video games that match. You know, if you go on Steam, there's such a massive array of games on Steam now which don't rely on Twitch-based responses, super high-tech understanding of strategic gameplay. I was advising someone else earlier on to play The Room, which is the iPad puzzle game. Like it's not a two-player game. Have you heard of The Room? So it's amazing. It's really good. It's on the iPad, and basically it's a series of puzzle boxes, and you manipulate them by swiping them on the screen. And you have to find a way to open them up, and it's just really tactile. And it's one of those games where you just can curl up on a chair in front of the fire and play with it and mess around with it, and it's really understandable. But if you're prepared to sort of sit down with your dad on a cold afternoon and play this game, I think that would be something that would work. So I'm not sure competing is always the best. So like we always think when we play video games together, we naturally think to compete, but I think cooperative works really well, playing an experience together. So I would diagnose, or I would suggest, as the doctor of gaming, try The Room, play it once a week, and then come back.
Okay, I'll try. Thank you.
Okay, someone over here.
My question is not to the essence of your talk, but I think you will tolerate my curiosity. You said that the games sector makes about $100 billion a year or something?
Yeah.
Do you have any figures as to what percentage of that goes to the types of games that we do not approve, those full of violence and etc.?
Okay, well, I do approve of those. I have no problem with violent games whatsoever. Okay. So it's really, really tricky because it varies every year. So some years there'll be lots of big kind of shoot 'em ups, and some years there won't be. So that figure is divided between lots of different types of games. And just as big as the big shooters like Call of Duty are the big mobile puzzle games like Candy Crush Saga, where there's no violence, you're just making lines of sweets. So I would say it's tricky. Games which involve physical, violent interaction, I would say would probably make up maybe 40% of that figure, maybe slightly less. Because puzzle games, sports games, they're all really, really big. One of the biggest multiplayer esports games at the moment is a game called Rocket League, which is basically football in cars, soccer in cars. And that's a massively popular online esports game. So people are watching it being played competitively. So, so I would say it's still a reasonable, the fact is that violent interaction is one of the easiest things to portray on a screen. If you have a controller in your hand and you press a button, it's one of the most kind of satisfying feedback loops, like something instantly happens. Video games came out of that kind of need for something instantaneously response to things. That's why we got things like Space Invaders in the late 1970s. Firing a gun, pressing a button to fire a gun and for someone else to fall over somewhere else, it's an instant feedback loop. So you can kind of understand why it became such an important part of video games. But video games come with age ratings now. Europe has the PEGI age rating system. So you're not allowed to sell games to people under certain age ratings. It's just like films. So if there's an 18-rated video game, you're not allowed to sell that. You will be prosecuted for selling that to people under 18. So I think it's unavoidable that violence is part of video games, and it always will be. And I enjoy playing violent games. But they are not, I do not think they are a majority. They're a part of the system. Many people will go through their whole lives never playing a violent video game, will only play things like Candy Crush or puzzle games or whatever. So, I hope that kind of answers your question.
Hi, I have a question regarding snobbery. So obviously in popular culture, I thought it was really interesting that you said that The Guardian is one of the only papers that has a video games editor versus a theatre or a film or a food critic. And you've written a novel about video games, and I know that increasingly, again, I don't play them, but my brother is a really big fan of The Last of Us.
Yes.
And he wouldn't stop telling me about the fact that and I played it with him, and I was amazed, the story is as rich as any novel or Oscar-winning movie. Do you think that eventually, I mean, I know there are video games awards, but in the same way that we've seen the boundaries of what literature is, for instance, start to blur, do you think and hope that maybe video games and the storylines and narratives, rich narratives behind them, will start to be accepted? Or do you think there's still a lot of popular culture snobbery around video games?
There is, but I think that is changing, and I think it's a generational thing. So I think, I mentioned J.J. Abrams in Hollywood, and he comes from a generation of filmmakers who grew up playing video games and who accept video game culture and conventions as a normal part of everyday life. I think that's happening across the board. So I talked about Punch Drunk Productions, who are one of the great current theatre production companies who are now making immersive theatre based on video games. BAFTA, the British Academy of Film and Television Awards, has awards for video games every year. In fact, they had their awards last week, where Uncharted 4 won Best Game, which is by the makers of Last of Us. And again, it's a beautiful, really compelling, really emotional story. So the more we get bodies like BAFTA taking games seriously, I mean, BAFTA is one of the great arts organisations on the planet. The National Film and Television and Theatre School, based in North London, one of the great teaching schools for theatre and television and film, has a course in video games now. New York University has one of the best kind of game centres on the planet. Some of the they have students there making incredible, amazing games, which are presented in New York and clubs around New York on a regular basis. LA has Glitch City, a group of independent games developers who got together and created a kind of community of game developers, which is being really taken really seriously by the LA arts scene. So it is happening around the peripheries of culture. Video games are moving in like an invading army. But it's a generational thing. Like, Hollywood takes games incredibly seriously now. Like, so much of the Marvel universe, the way that the Marvel universe works, the way the characters interact, the way that the stories seed into each other, is very much taken from the way that video games work. So I think, video games will eventually be taken seriously on a wider perspective, simply because lots of the rules and conventions of video games are quietly, slowly seeping out into other areas. You can even see it in architecture. You can see architecture inspired by video games. There's an amazing building in Singapore, which looks like a great big, looks like it's made out of Minecraft blocks. It's incredible. I have a picture on my computer, but I won't be able to find it, and I don't want to do anything with it now because it's already misbehaved once this evening. But yeah, the rules and the ideas of video games are seeping out quietly. Without people noticing, it's going to happen. So I think we're moving into an era as well of much more interactivity. So I think we're going to see much more interactive television. We're going to see lots more kind of stories where the input of the audiences are involved, because the generation under us, like what I said, Generation Swipe, they expect to be involved in the stories that they read and experience. They expect to be represented. So video games are the best way of doing that, I think. Is that it? Yep.
Keith, thanks very much.
Okay.
So, another round.
Thank you very much. Thank you.